Hacking back, broadly stated, is the ability for a victim of a cybercrime or an intrusion to be able to attack the attackers. If you're like me and many other pundits, this very thought can make you break out into a sweat, imagining private companies attempting to attack script kiddies and nation-state actors alike for perceived wrongdoings. Now, when taken to this extreme, this concept should definitely raise some concerns. But what if I told you that I'm actually a fan of hacking back? Not in the way that some mean, where any and all actions are permitted in retaliation to an intrusion, but rather in a controlled manner. My version of hacking back is what John Strand calls offensive countermeasures. Let's discuss this in more detail with our monthly book review, Offensive Countermeasures, The Art of Active Defense. Offensive Countermeasures, The Art of Active Defense, was originally published in 2013 with a second edition print running in 2017. While a lot can rapidly change in information security, both editions of the book continue to remain relevant to us today. While the books provide technological examples of how to implement OCM into active defense, the more important content isn't these technological examples. It's the mental models and frameworks introduced for how we as defenders can better approach the problems that we face. Depending on what edition of the book you pick up, you're looking at anywhere from 172 to 239 pages of content for a price of no more than $8 for the digital edition. As previously mentioned, the concept of hacking back can be a very loaded and dangerous concept, depending on your definition. John does an amazing job of addressing this issue by explaining why we need offensive countermeasures, what we hope to accomplish with them, and by defining three main classifications for the types of activities that would be encompassed to include what we mean when we say hacking back. Let's touch on each of these points in a little more detail during this review, but for more information, you'll likely want to pick up a copy of the book for yourself. Why do we need OCM? So, given to us in the introduction, John does a great job of summarizing why we want offensive countermeasures. He says that the current threat landscape is shifting, and we need to develop new strategies to defend ourselves. Even more importantly, we need to better understand who's attacking us and why. The goal of OCM is not to see how many hackers we can catch, but rather to create an environment where we have a better chance in the security game. Something that a lot of defenders tend to accept sometimes is this defeatist attitude, right? There's this concept that, well, an attacker only needs to be right once, and I need to be right all the time, and some organizations kind of throw their hands up in the air, buy some technology, and just say, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Now, this couldn't be further from the truth. I constantly talk to people, and when discussing, vulnerabilities in networks or recommendations for them, one of the things that people miss a lot is we as defenders build the environments that attackers have to engage us in. So when you adopt this OCM mindset that we're going to talk about a little bit more, you can make it increasingly more difficult for an attacker to effectively attack you, not just because you have antivirus, but because you are implementing deception and attribution techniques throughout your environment that you've placed there because you make the environment. So with that in mind, let's talk about what we hope to accomplish. So as defined from all that, there are two main goals for offensive countermeasures. We want to improve our understanding of who is attacking us and why, and we want to create that environment where we have a better chance of defending ourselves. We're going to get to attribution in a minute, but first let's talk about improving our odds. To do this, we'll need to introduce the concept of the OODA loop. So what's an OODA loop? The OODA loop is a cycle developed by Air Force Colonel John Boyd to describe the process that fighter pilots undergo during combat. More generally, though, it's a 4-step process that all of us undergo hundreds of thousands of times a day whenever we make any decision. What it stands for is observe, orient, decide, and act, where the model says that in order to make any decision, we have to go through a full cycle of the loop. So let's use a concrete example. Take an attacker wanting to compromise a system. They have to first observe their intended target, maybe do things like port scans to find open services and do correlations of banners to vulnerabilities, or maybe they have to use a web spider to crawl our website and find information about potential locations for SQL injection. So that's observation. With all this information then, they enter the second phase of the loop, which is to orient. And what we mean by this is that to make a decision, the attacker has to orient themselves to filter down all the available information into actionable information. So yes, there might be many ports open, but which of those ports matter? Which of those ports does an attacker have an exploit for? Yes, there may be many, many inputs in a website, but which of them look to be potentially vulnerable to SQL injection? Once an attacker has oriented themselves based off of the available information, they can make a decision. So they will decide to attempt to start going through the process of developing a good SQL injection, or they will decide to throw a particular exploit. And then once that decision has been made, they will act. They will throw the exploit. They will do SQL injection. And now, once they do that, the SQL injection could succeed, it could fail, it could give them a web shell. There's many things that could happen as a result of that, which will then lead to a new beginning of the cycle for the OODA loop, where now they have to observe what happened as a result of their previous actions, orient to the new information, and so on and so forth. So the framework is useful because not only do attackers operate within an OODA loop, but defenders do as well. And the goal when we talk about OODA loops in the concept of kind of combat, right? Offense versus defense, an attacker versus the defenders, or even two fighter pilots. The goal is, if we as defenders can make decisions and actions faster than the attacker, we gain a tempo advantage. Our OODA loop is processing faster than the attackers, and it gives us the upper hand because we can make more decisions and perform more actions in the same time window as an attacker does. So with this understanding out of the way of what our goals are and the mental frameworks in place, let's talk about the actual three categories that John Strand breaks offensive countermeasures down into. So the first category is annoyance. Annoyance is all about wasting the attacker's time and getting inside their OODA loop. The more steps that an attacker has to take, the more likely we are to be able to catch them prior to them reaching their goal. This is also starting to be referred to as cyber deception, and it's going to include a number of tactics to assist with identifying attackers by using things like traps. The second goal of these kind of three areas for OCM is attribution. So attribution simply defines a series of efforts that we take to understand where an attacker is really coming from and learning about the attacker's capabilities and tactics. So we can think of this as things like the use of a medium to high interaction honeypot to see what attackers do post-compromise or post-exploit, embedding beaconing logic in web pages and potentially sensitive or even dummy documents, or adding tracking logic to jars or other line of business executables. Because frequently, if an attacker is going to go to the effort to steal our documents from our environment or steal, some sort of proprietary executables or other data from the environment, they're ultimately going to have to open it and look at it somewhere else. So we can gain attribution by using these common tracking technologies so that when a, either real or fake document gets exfiltrated from our network, we can know that somebody has stolen it because we will receive a beacon from somewhere else in the world. And while attackers are very good at obfuscating their IP addresses during operations, some of them, people make mistakes and documents are frequently opened outside of the concept of the active compromise, where an attacker may leak, real IP addresses that provide more valuable insight as to who they are and what their goals were based off of what document was stolen. The last of the three categories of actions that John ties to OCM is what he calls attack. And this is where the very limited of definition of hacking back needs to be established so that a good, safe and legal approach is taken by any organizations who want to go to this attack step. So attack, as defined by John, is running code on attacker systems. And if you look at why we're doing it, this is really for the purpose of assisting law enforcement with attribution or investigation. So it's viewed as a more offensive form of attribution, but the key is we don't do it for revenge. We are not hacking back to try to steal back our documents because once the document's gone, it's probably already been copied. You can't put the genie back in the jar. So we're not trying to steal back our documents. We're not trying to destroy the attacker's systems. We're not trying to steal their code from them so that we get their malware samples. The purpose is not revenge. The purpose is attribution and assisting law enforcement. Now, things that we could do here are we could go one step further. Instead of just adding trackers to documents, you could, with proper legal authorizations and discussions with law enforcement and understanding with your own legal department, talk about things like actually using custom JavaScript payloads to extend attribution capabilities within the attacker's web browser. So, as an example of this, John talks about using Beef, or the browser exploitation framework, to hook attackers' web browsers and inject additional malicious logic, or in our case, non-malicious logic to gain attribution information, into the attacker's system. So you're executing code on their system, not just a simple beacon per se, or not just a simple GeoIP check-in, but actual other code. Other things could include potentially delivering C2 payloads via poisoned websites or documents. So again, you're getting actual command and control potentially on the system, but the goal is for attribution, not for revenge. So overall, Offensive Countermeasures, The Art of Active Defense, gets a solid 5-star rating from me, not for its technical content per se, but rather for being an incredibly approachable and affordable introductory volume to the concepts of active defense, and a solid primer of what organizations and individuals should keep in mind when discussing the topic of hacking back. The way that John codifies the 3 A's of annoyance, attribution, and attack provides a framework where we as defenders can be creative and find ways to make attacking our organizations more painful and less profitable for attackers. With the digital version of the previous edition being free for Amazon Prime members, and the newest version only costing $8 at the time of filming, I encourage anyone who hasn't heard about the concept of offensive countermeasures, or those who may have heard about it but just want more information, to pick up a copy and learn more for yourself.